Now,
on News Talk 105.9 WMAL.
O'Connor and Company.
It's 5:06 on a Friday morning in the nation's capital. Thanks for joining us. President Biden addressed the nation last night, and if you're like me and you went to sleep early because you're an early riser, we'll give you all the highlights coming up momentarily. Also at 6:35, Maureen Brody is running for Fairfax School Board. 7:05, Brett Baer, Fox News Channel. 7:45, Bram Weinstein on the Commanders game this weekend, coming off that big victory, now going up to New York to play the Giants. 8:05 brings us Kansas Senator Roger Marshall. Talk about, everything that's going on right now in the world. And then at 8:35, Henry Rogers, Daily Caller's got the latest on the House Speaker race. There will be another vote this morning.
Oh, boy.
Patrice Onwuka, good to see you.
I'm back.
You are. Double duty here, and a happy Friday to you.
Happy Friday.
Did you also go to sleep last night before the...
I did, and then I woke up at 2 a.m. this morning and watched
You're a better,
and prepared for
better
the show,
man than
too,
I. I listened to it on my way in.
Okay, yes.
I queued it up on the...
Well, it was shorter than presidential addresses.
Well,
so...
he can't get through a long
But he
speech.
was sitting down. I mean, he had, he had his jammies on underneath the desk.
Well, who among us?
Right.
You haven't seen what I'm wearing today. All right, we'll get to all those details in a moment. But, yeah, what's going on with the House Speaker battle? Once again, yesterday, Jim Jordan fell short of the number needed, and there was some suggestion that he was being pressured to sort of step away. But he's not. He is still running. He plans to take a vote in this morning on the House. He's also going to do a press conference. I believe it's scheduled for 10 a.m. I think I saw that.
Okay.
Where he'll be doing a press conference for the media ahead of the vote. And maybe overnight tonight something has changed. There was a conference meeting yesterday amongst the Republicans. Here's Jordan emerging from that conference meeting.
So I'll just say this. We made the pitch to members on the resolution as a way to lower the temperature and get back to work. We decided that wasn't where we're going to go. I'm still running for Speaker, and I plan to go to the floor and get the votes and win this race. But I want to go talk with a few of my colleagues. Particularly, I want to talk with the 20 individuals who voted against me so that we can move forward and begin to work for the American people.
And that was it. That's Jim Jordan. All right, so now what was he talking about? The resolution that they were hoping to put forth was sort of characterized as Speaker Light, which was, we discussed this yesterday morning, which would be to expand the role of Speaker Pro Tem McHenry.
Yes.
The guy with the bow tie. And let the business of the House move forward without an official speaker, but an expanded temporary role until they can resolve this. That was rejected. And by all accounts, the conference got heated. As you just heard Mr. Jordan say, we're going to try to lower the temperature here. At one point, I guess, Congressman Matt Gaetz went up to the podium to speak to his colleagues. And Kevin McCarthy, now just a backbencher congressman from California, stood up from his backbench and started screaming at him, saying, "Sit down, Matt. No one wants to hear what you have to say." And then, of course, he screamed back, saying, "You sit down, Kevin. You got fired. You don't have any voice." It's just got...
You got fired. Really? How
Yeah,
did that happen?
well,
oh, my goodness.
Henry Rogers, who writes at the Daily Caller and has pretty good sources on Capitol Hill, he has an article saying, basically, a good handful of those Republicans who are opposing Jim Jordan right now actually like Jim Jordan, think Jim Jordan's fine, would be a good speaker. They just don't want to reward Matt Gaetz. Basically, they're voting no on Jordan to punish Gaetz,
or even vengeance.
Yes, sort of. So
yeah, but the people, but it's not Gaetz who's who's being punished. It's the American people. Right now, not having a speaker. Marjorie Taylor Greene, who we had on the show yesterday. It was great to talk to her. She's literally said, this is broken. It is absolutely broken. I think she's one of those who Breitbart is reporting. She's like, listen, the question about how long, and I think I raised this yesterday, how long the temporary power would be given to the temporary speaker, the pro tem speaker. how long that power would be is a good question. Is it mid-November until the next continuing resolution expires? Is it till the end of the year? God forbid. Could it be till through the rest of 2024 and get through the election cycle? And so those questions were never really ironed out. And I think that's why there was a lot of angst on Republicans who are like, no, we don't want to do this. And as we said yesterday, Democrats are on board with doing it. The Washington Post editorial board wants to do it. So it makes you kind of wonder.
Yeah, it means
probably why it's a no-go.
You don't want to do it. You don't want to do it if the Democrats and the Washington Post think it's a good idea. Matt Gaetz did talk to reporters.
What do you think about this resolution? Do you think that McHenry?
I think that I'm against Speaker Light. I'm against Bud Light. I believe it is a constitutional desecration to not elect a Speaker of the House. We need to stay here until we elect a Speaker. And if someone can't get the votes, we need to go on to the next person. But twisting and torturing the Constitution to empower a temporary speaker is having a Speaker Light that is not constitutionally contemplated, is deeply infirm, and I will do everything possible to stop it.
I don't know if it's a contortion of the Constitution. I don't think there's actually powers of the Speaker that are firmly delineated in the Constitution. I think that the House is able to empower the Speaker based on their own set of rules. I could be wrong about that. I'm not a constitutional scholar like Matt Gaetz. But I would say that you know, the plan to empower Patrick McHenry with further powers as a Speaker pro tem absolutely crashed and burned at this point. Yeah. Back to Henry Rogers reporting in Daily Caller. South Carolina Republican Nancy Mace, who voted with Matt Gaetz to get rid of Kevin McCarthy and also opposed Steve Scalise, but ended up supporting Jim Jordan, said that she believes GOP members opposed Jim Jordan are doing it purely to spite Matt Gaetz. Went on to say, the American people want a speaker who will be honest and represent them, not business as usual in Washington. It's disgraceful for a number of elected officials, many of them in safe GOP districts, to oppose Jim Jordan purely to spite Matt Gaetz. Steve Scalise was seen as a compromise figure there, but the people who are on Nancy Mace and Matt Gaetz's side said that he was too closely aligned with Kevin McCarthy. Which is kind of interesting because I remember when the Freedom Caucus and the more conservative members of the House forced Scalise into leadership under John Boehner. The only reason Scalise is part of leadership right now is because John Boehner had to take him. They were holding back votes for Boehner, I think it was in 2014, maybe 2012.
Okay.
Because they were concerned that everyone in leadership at the time, Speaker Boehner from Ohio, at the time Ohio was kind of a purple state. It's firmly red now.
Yeah.
But at the time, it was a major toss-up state, you remember. And everybody else in leadership was from a non-red state. None of them were from a very strong conservative Republican state.
Okay.
So that's when Scalise was presented as, hey, he's from Louisiana. Let's get him in there so at least we can have a voice for us amongst leadership. And now, because he's done a good job as in leadership, he's seen as tainted.
Or establishment.
Exactly.
Well, I mean, that's part of the challenge of of governing for a good amount of time. When you are in charge, suddenly you're no longer the outsider. You're no longer the person who's criticizing. You're the one who's coming up with a policy and trying to get it enacted. You know, and I just can't. When you were talking about Nancy Mace, when you were talking about Matt Gaetz, I couldn't help but think, isn't the pot calling the kettle black? I mean, these are folks who are letting their own personal qualms about McCarthy get ahead of them, at least Matt Gaetz. Maybe not Nancy Mace, I don't know. But Matt Gaetz. And now he's criticizing Republicans, his other fellow Republicans, I just for the same thing. So I do think that the conference needs to get its act together. And this is a great time to do it, but well before people will remember in 2024 how all of the chaos that occurred right now, or the back and forth that occurred right now. And for all those folks who said, oh, let them fight it out, this is great, it is actually not great.
Well, it's reaching the point where it needs to be resolved, and I think hopefully it will be resolved. The fact that Jordan decided, you know what, let's go forward with one more vote tomorrow, which would be today, tells me that he feels, well, he was confident a few days ago, so maybe I shouldn't get ahead of myself. But it makes me feel like they've got something in the works, especially with now this new military aid package that's in their face.
$100 billion.
A little bit more on that and how the politics of this might work out. And again, a little bit of a reminder of how we got here with the speaker battle in just 17.
WMAL.
Making sense of the news.
Live
From the Home Paramount Pest Control Studios.
Home Paramount, the leader in pest control since 1939.
Later this morning on the Chris Plant Show, not a single Arab nation will take in the jihadis from Gaza, but the Democrat jihad squad here demands we take them all in. 9 a.m. on WMAL.
I was at the mic, I was speaking, and Matt Gaetz tried to interrupt and so I told him to sit down, and we sat down.
What's your deal?
I think it. No, I told him to sit down. I think the entire conference screamed at him. People are, listen, the whole country, I think, would scream at Matt Gaetz right now. Remember, it was a crazy eights led by Matt Gaetz and every single Democrat that put us into this situation.
Crazy eights led by Matt Gaetz. I hadn't heard that one before. See, suddenly he's not speaker, and he can come up with some clever things to say.
Absolutely.
Come on, Kevin, where were you when we needed you? All right, listen, a lot of people are piling on Matt Gaetz here, and I get it. I do. But at the same time, let me just say a couple of words on his behalf with caution. Because I had said at the time, okay, this is great. Go ahead and do what you're going to do, but have a plan. And clearly there was no plan.
Was no plan.
The only plan was get rid of Kevin, and then was okay. Well, now what? Right? It's that scene when Robert Redford in The Candidate, he wins the election, and he's like, now what? But a word in support of Matt Gaetz just for a moment here, because you'll remember, and I want to remind everybody that the evening after he lost the gavel, Kevin McCarthy gave a rambling press conference to the media to sort of give his life story and then explain how he got here from there. And he revealed that he thought he had an insurance policy. He thought he had a Trump card. He thought he had protection from something like this. Nancy Pelosi promised him that they'd have his back. He walked into that vote when Matt Gaetz was going to call the chair and call the question.
Yeah.
He walked in thinking he would save himself and stay in position with support from Democrats.
Interesting. It was in this room after we had won the majority. I had become speaker list, and Nancy Pelosi came to me. She was speaker at the time on the way out. And I told her I was having issues with getting enough votes. And she said, "What's the problem?" I said, "They want this one person can rule you out." She was the only speaker to have changed that rule. I had the power to call the vote on her, but I never would. I lost some votes because of it. And she said, "Just give it to him. I'll always back you up." I made the same offer to Boehner, and same thing.
Go ahead and accept it. I'll always back you up, is what Nancy Pelosi promised him. And, well, clearly that didn't happen.
Yeah.
So I'm sorry. If you're Kevin McCarthy, and after all of these years of seeing Nancy Pelosi in action, and you go into this thing thinking that you've got her to back you up and you can trust her and you can trust the Democrats, honestly, I don't think you deserve to stay in the speakership. That said, again, that tells me probably it was a good idea to make a move against him at some point. I wish they had done it at the end of this session, not in the middle of it. That said, if you're going to do it, have a plan B. And now we're what are we? A plan like
Z?
Yeah, or double G or something.
I hear where you're coming from. And note to everybody out there who is in office, be careful about trusting your enemies or the other team. I understand work bipartisanly on a lot of issues, but sometimes when it comes down to bare brass knuckles politics and power control, the opposing team is about the opposing team keeping power, not about ensuring that yours is secure. So I get your point. That said, I wouldn't go that far. I think he was doing what he thought was best, and he knew that he would always, former Speaker McCarthy knew that he would always have a faction to deal with, and he was trying to figure out a way to get around that faction. And, sometimes you have to figure out sometimes you do have to have a backup plan. And we see what happens when you don't have a backup plan.
But it's also one of the things I always hear this uniparty thing, and I reject the idea of a uniparty because fundamentally there are some very important issues for me personally that the Republicans and Democrats couldn't be more different about.
Sure.
Things like abortion,
yeah.
Things like protecting and standing by our friend Israel, issues like that where Democrats are on, in my opinion,
very opposing.
Yeah, almost the evil side of the issue, not just wrong. but evil. That said, there is one of the problems that the American people perceive here in Washington is that Republican Democrats go on TV and act like they don't like each other, and then they're real chummy behind the scenes. And that is a problem, frankly, because it makes it look like this whole thing is a movie playing out.
It's fake.
And
Yeah.
here's a good example of it. Vern Buchanan.
Yes.
Florida congressman. He's a Republican. And he is one of the voices opposing Jim Jordan this week.
He voted against him.
Yeah.
That's right.
That's not all he did this week, Patrice.
Well, Wednesday night, where did we find him? None other than the Biden White House bowling.
He went bowling.
He went bowling
at the Biden White House.
At the Biden White House. I mean, I guess it's a fun thing to do if you get invited, but this is not I don't think this is the time to be bowling when the House needs a speaker, when you need to be working through the other options that are on the table to figure out how you can turn your vote into someone who's going to be in leadership rather than going and throwing balls down the lane in Biden's White House and President Biden doesn't care about
that is a gutter. That's a gutter ball move right there. That's not what you do, because even if it was just, oh gosh, we're just being friendly and we're just bowling. No, because the appearance is that backroom deals are being made, and that's the last thing we need. It's 5:23. All right, coming up, we're gonna tell you what Hill staffers have done here. You know who really runs things there on Capitol Hill, not congressmen.
Oh no, it's
not
the
senators.
Staffers.
The staffers, they do everything.
They do a lot.
They've circulated a petition to try to force their bosses, the actual elected officials, to support Hamas. We'll tell you all about it.
WMAL-FM, Woodbridge, Washington, a Cumulus media station.
Making sense of the news.
News Talk 105.9.
Now
On News Talk 105.9 WMAL.
O'Connor and Company.
All right, it's 5:36. Thank you for letting us be a part of your Friday morning. We are honored, and we're going to make it pay off. At 6:35, we're going to instruct you on the latest candidate for Fairfax County School Board, Maureen Brody. At 7:05, Brett Baer of Fox News Channel. 7:45, Bram Weinstein, the play-by-play man for the Commanders. 8:05, Senator Roger Marshall of Kansas. And then at 8:35, Henry Rogers of the Daily Caller. Good lineup. It's always a great lineup when it starts with Patrice Onwuka, though.
Happy Friday.
Thank you. I'm doing my best. All right. 411 anonymous Hill staffers have circulated a petition behind their boss's back to demand a ceasefire. Congressional staffers demand. That's odd. I'm sorry, what constitutional power do they have to demand something?
Who voted them into office?
Yeah.
No one.
By the way, this thing, 411, wow, 411 congressional staffers. That could basically be the staffs of like 10 leading Democrats.
Exactly.
Maybe 20.
There are thousands of staffers on Capitol Hill.
Yeah, it really isn't that big a deal. Frankly, and by the way, this is my favorite part of it. So they circulated this petition to demand that their bosses, the actual members of Congress, vote for a ceasefire and a de-escalation, which, by the way, is basically Israel surrendering, not able to defend themselves, and Hamas winning the day.
And leaving Hamas in place.
Yeah. So they circulated a petition, and 411 of them demand it. I'm going to read you the names of the 411. Are you ready?
Okay.
Oh, I can't, because they actually signed it anonymously. Boy, that's a flex, isn't it?
that is embarrassing. If they are so if they're so passionate and principled, if they really want us, they should put some skin in the game by putting their names out there on the letter, hand it to their boss this morning and say, "Sir, madam, I want you to call for a ceasefire."
It's
and
embarrassing.
I'm joining 410 of my other colleagues on Capitol Hill.
Yeah.
And see what happens to them. Talk about a mass exodus.
So they didn't even put their names to it.
They did.
But they are making a demand. I have some contacts on Capitol Hill, by the way. And I actually got the... here, I can show you. It's a screenshot of the petition that was circulated to all of the... It says, please sign this.
It has a heart sign
little
on it.
heart emoji, yeah. Hill staff open letter sign on. Please use this form to be counted among Hill staff signers of this open letter calling for... But you wouldn't be counted. Counted like a number, but not your name. Calling for members of Congress to support a ceasefire and humanitarian aid in Israel and Palestine. By the way, I love that they just... affirm that there is a political region known as Palestine.
Well, there isn't.
By 5 p.m. on October 19th. Your signature will be completely anonymous. No identifying information will appear on the letter, and this form does not collect your name or email. The only public signature on the open letter will be a total number of signatories described as, quote, staff of the United States Congress. So, boy, talk about a futile and cowardly move here. That means nothing, but it'll get headlines. Look
That's
at even the
exactly
Hill
what it is.
staffers are rising up in favor of ceasefire.
Staffers spoke to HuffPost anonymously out of concern for their safety and job security. And apparently they retell their own personal stories about being the children of genocide, whether part of the Palestinian diaspora or descendants of those who were genocide, Jewish young people whose great ancestors were murdered. Some of them were murdered. And so, this is just an embarrassment. And I say some of them only because I'm not saying that it didn't happen. I'm just saying obviously they survived. So they came from someone. But
there's a part of this letter though that really bothers me, and this is echoed, if not amplified, by President Biden's remarks that we're going to get to in about 20 minutes here on the program. We'll give you all the breakdown of what he had to say last night as he rambled and meandered his way through his teleprompter. But I want to read this part of this letter. In light of anti-Semitism, anti-Muslim, and anti-Palestinian sentiment on the rise nationwide. Now, I've seen the anti-Semitism.
Oh, it's everywhere.
First of all, I saw it in the horrendous slaughter and massacre of people who were guilty of being Jewish at the hands of Hamas. I've seen anti-Semitism on the streets in Sidney, in Berlin, in London, here in Washington, New York, college campuses, people chanting from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free, which means get rid of Israel, which means, and the only way you're going to get rid of Israel is to kill the Jews who were living there and want to protect it. I've heard gas the Jews. That's what they were chanting out down in Sidney. So I've seen the anti-Semitism on full display. Can you help me out here? I do know there was the murder of the one little boy in the Chicago area.
Yes. And his mother was stabbed as well.
Right. And it says that the lunatic, evil piece of trash that murdered this boy did it for anti-Muslim purposes. I saw that story. But the rise, and I'm reading again, anti-Muslim, anti-Palestinian sentiment on the rise nationwide. Have you seen, where is that? And I'm actually being genuine. I have not seen it. Where's the marches?
What I think they're equating us people who stand with Israel and stand against Hamas as somehow standing against Palestinians. And listen, that either exposes two things. One, either if you support Hamas and you're Palestinian, then you are one and the same with the terrorist. Or it's saying, well, Hamas is, Palestine. If you support Israel, then obviously you can't believe that the Palestinians have any sort of claim to the land. So, and I think I lost my train of thought there.
Well, but I think I know what you're saying, which is basically, listen, Hamas just murdered over 1,000 innocent Jews in Israel. They raped women and they kidnapped, they decapitated children, and they kidnapped
hostages,
hundreds.
including American
They're still
hostages.
holding hostages right now. Hamas did that.
Yes.
If you stand up and point that out and say, and because of that, I don't support Hamas. In fact, I believe Hamas should be eliminated.
Yes, as
whether
a terrorist
that means
group.
arrest them or if they won't come quietly, you kill them. Now, if by saying that you're against Hamas, the people who just carried out this horrific terrorist attack, you are in some way, let me quote it again, anti-Muslim or anti-Palestinian, I guess I'm guilty.
And I think
I guess that's it.
That's the point. That's what they're saying. And so they don't want you to be anti-Hamas because then that means that you're anti-Palestinian. But in my mind,
warped.
It's so very warped. But that's their thinking, which is they're all one and the same. And so when you see them, these pro-Palestinian, pro-Hamas protesters out there holding up pictures with the paratroopers, celebrating and dropping in to go and murder people who are having fun at a festival, then that to me tells you are just as bad as the Hamas person.
You're
you
right.
are just as bad as the terrorist.
I'm sorry. It's just if you support Hamas, you support terrorists.
You need to extract you need to draw that distinction yourself.
Right.
Because otherwise, I'm just going to assume that you are pro-Hamas.
Well, this statement from these 411 anonymous Hill staffers who claim there's a rise in anti-Muslim sentiment in this country, it's going nowhere. It's meaningless. It's stupid.
It'll get a headline.
But it does, and it also appears to have informed the moral compass that President Biden used to guide his way through his rambling remarks last night. Because he also warned of the rising tide of anti-Islamic sentiment in this country. We're going to play that for you and push back quite forcefully coming up in a bit. First, though, it's 5:45. WMAL traffic and weather every 10 minutes. First on the fives with Steve Hirshhorn and the Hadid carpet cleaning traffic. All right, so yesterday in Fulton County, Sidney Powell, attorney and advisor to former President Trump. I just want to be clear. She was never retained as Trump's attorney. She advised and was like a voice in the room, but was never actually his lawyer during the post-2020 election ordeal. She, though, was indicted in this grand RICO scheme down there, which begins jury selection, I believe, today or Monday. She pled guilty. She pled guilty to a misdemeanor. The penalty that goes along with her guilty plea is she has to pay a $6,000 fine and write a letter of apology. Now, let me pause here for a second. First of all, I don't think Sidney Powell is guilty of anything other than giving advice to somebody, legal advice to somebody. And I think she would have prevailed had she won. But if her attorneys had worked out with the DA's office in Fulton County that if she entered a guilty plea now, she pays $6,000, she writes a letter, and she's done with this, I mean, it's hard to fault her for doing that. Okay.
Well, yeah, I mean, avoiding legal fees, avoiding
a
case. I mean, come on,
all of it.
Trial. Yeah.
And I've always had great respect for Sidney Powell. I think she did an incredible job representing Lieutenant General Michael Flynn against a gross criminal negligence from the Justice Department and from Robert Mueller's office. All right, so set that aside for a second, whether this was the right thing or wrong thing for her to do. It was the right thing for her personally. Yeah. So God bless her. What does this tell you about these charges?
Exactly.
What does it tell you about what they've got here when they're willing to take a $6,000 fine and letter of apology on a misdemeanor plea? I was told this was a grand RICO felony racketeering thing, and she obviously was a key part of that. And they're willing to take this. This actual case must be pretty thin.
Weak.
Yeah.
Exactly.
And why would they take this? Why wouldn't they just no, we're not going to take your plea. We've got you, right?
If the charges were that strong against her, particularly around racketeering, they would see her as a bigger fish, maybe not the biggest fish they want, but a bigger fish, and they would hold her feet to the fire on that. $6,000 and a letter of apology.
Right.
I mean, to me, that's what you give somebody who, vandalized the school library. To me, this seems like nothing much to see here.
Yeah.
So that suggests that maybe there's nothing much to see here for a lot of the other co-conspirators.
Andy McCarthy, who is often very spot on his analysis of these things as a former assistant U.S. attorney, he said this, as I pointed out throughout, I'm reading from National Review, as I pointed out throughout the Mueller investigation, when prosecutors cut plea deals with cooperators early in the proceedings, they generally want the pleading defendants to admit guilt to the major charges in the indictment. That indicates to the public that the major conspiracy charged is real. It puts pressure on other defendants to plead guilty to serious charges and cooperate. Here, to the contrary, Fannie Willis, the DA in Fulton County, is not only abandoning the RICO charge, she's even getting felony guilty pleas she's not getting any felony guilty pleas of any kind. If these were serious prosecutions, we would not be seeing probation sentences. If Willis truly believed in her ballyhooed RICO charge, the flaws of which I discussed elsewhere, she'd induce her cooperators to plead guilty to the RICO charge and explain in the plea allocation what they did. particularly in conjunction with Donald Trump. That makes them guilty. Willis isn't doing that. So these guilty pleas make no sense in the grander charges that she's levied against all of these people, including Donald Trump.
Which to me says that if the structure of her case against Donald Trump is so weak that you could blow it with like a house of cards, then what does she have actually against him?
It's almost like they just wanted all of the headlines and all of the media frenzy of charging him and getting the mugshot out there, which is pretty much exactly what,
But it's backfiring.
We'll see. We'll see. I have
At least in the polls right now,
If
it's
they got a
backfiring.
grand jury to bring these charges, I have no doubt they will find a jury in Fulton County to do this as well. It's 5:53.